Welcome back to another episode of this TouchDesigner tutorial series, and today we've got a nice fun one. We've got the spooky eyeball that I made that sort of came together a lot quicker than I thought it would. I just thought one day I'm going to make this weird, creepy eye, paranoid eye moving around using, some sort of noise or channel operator, and this is the result of it. And you could, set this up to a connect and have the eyeball moving towards us, a point as someone's walking by. So it could be quite a good sort of, immersive experience here. And I think this is quite a good and advanced episode in a way. A lot more advanced than I thought I would be covering. But, here we are. Because it uses a range of different operators within TouchDesigner. We have here, our spheres created with SOPs, these 3D operators, and a lighting setup with a sort of geometry 3D environment, because TouchDesigner can't just take a 3D object and just show it. You need to put it inside a 3D environment and actually turn that 3D information into 2D information. So that's what we're looking at when we're looking at this, is actually a 2D image that has been rendered frame by frame. So, speaking of 2D images, we have here our tops using, PNG images that I found on the internet of the eye whites and the iris. And that is then put onto a material operator, this yellow operators here. And then fed into our geometry. And all we're using is our channel operators here, I mentioned earlier. So this is really good, model for a range of different operators. So, if you like my videos, please, hit that subscribe button. It really helps support this channel and help me, keep making videos and gaining that momentum to share more of this information as I learn and as I create these tutorials. So definitely leave a comment below if you have any feedback. And so what we're going to do is we're going to zoom out. I prefer to do it this way and create a base. The reason why I like to do this is I can save these bases as components, and I can then bring them in, and I find it better than actually saving projects this way. So I'm creating these little components that I can save later in my folder and bring them and mix and match them however I want. So let's now start our eyeball. So for this we need two spheres on our SOP components here. Sphere 1, sphere 2. And on the sphere 1, we're going to call this sphere white for the eye whites, and then sphere iris for obvious reasons. And then we're going to hit transform. We're going to get another transform for both of them. And the reason why I'm doing this is I want to texture the iris and the sphere separately. So now that we've got this, before I start editing the size of the iris and everything, let's get up a render setup. And to do this, let's hit tab, and I'm going to show you the long way first, bringing in a geometry. Now you notice in the geometry there's no input and output, whereas if you were to hover over this output on the SOP, hold Control and click and drag out, and then press tab, go to components, geometry. Now you have an input and an output, which will save you having to go inside and putting in and out SOP. That's just long, nobody wants to do that. Okay, so we want to do this for both. I haven't actually tried it just as one. I might do that in the future to see what effect it will have, but for now I'm just going to do it this way. So we've got two geometries here. We're going to call this geometry white and geometry iris. And now if we bring in our render top, you can see there's a connection now that's formed. So these geometries are going to be processed inside our render top. So if you hit Command N, and we're going to basically create a background. So although this is coming over into our render top, it's not looking at anything. That's what I mean when TouchDesigner doesn't know how to process this information. So we need a camera to look at this ball, basically. So if you go over to components and bring in a camera, you can now see that there is a ball in a dark room. So let's bring in a light to light things up. Perfect. So we've got our lighting set up now, a very, very basic lighting setup. And I think before we start moving and animating anything or resizing these spheres, let's try and get some basic texture involved, because then that would help us with our chop operators for animating. So if you go over to tops, and we're going to use a movie file in, because movie file ins also take PNGs as the default is. So if you click over this file and click this plus button, and I've just found a sort of eye whites setup here with the iris. I just found this online, so just have a quick Google search, or actually what I would do is I'll put these two files down in the on my website actually, so you can download this on the blog, or down below in the comments. So I'll figure out how to do that. And we're going to rename this PNG whites. We want to just prepare a transform here, because we're going to need that, and a null. And so now we've got this 2D image. We need to sort of wrap it onto a material operator, so then we can reference that into our geometry. So let's move this back a little bit. Oh, select all and move it back. So let's go over to our mats, and we're going to use a Fong. And this Fong is basically just a sort of a texturing and a material operator that has different functions. And for now, we're just going to use a very basic diffuse map, which is this. We're going to use this as our diffuse map. So null whites, and let's bring this diffuse map in here. And for our geo white, we want to sort of bring this Fong whites into our geo white. So if we click on geo white and go over to render, there's a material there section ready for us to go. So that's why we brought that in now. So we just have our eyeball white here just sitting there. And we can now go ahead and start animating this, because I think it gives us enough texture to actually see what's going on. So if we hit tab and go over to chops, we're going to start animating this now. So we're going to use a noise operator for this case. Okay, we're going to use two different noises. One is going to be our noise X, and the other one is going to be our noise Y. Okay, so we bring in our math, and we're going to bring in a null. So we're going to call this null X. Just going to do this again over here, and null, call this null Y. To start off this noise X as an animation, for some reason you have to click on your noise and go over to common, click on time slice, and now it would start using data to create some movement. So here on our noise Y, we just go over to noise and we just pick a different seed. That's why we've got 2, so we can have a little bit more of a realistic effect on here. Excuse me. So let's start transforming this now. So click on our transform with the sphere Y, and over here on the rotate, let's try and find what our x-axis is, because it's okay. So the reason why it's doing this, let's just stop that for a second. So okay, you can see it's the x-axis here is actually moving the y-axis. So let's not, can't have that. We want this to actually be referencing the x-axis on here, and you can see that now. If we go over to our math operator and turn up the multiply a little bit more, we can see that it's actually moving on the x-axis now, even though it's showing up on the y here. So if we just remember that this is the right one, so we can then copy this on our sphere iris, and if we bring this back for the sphere iris, we want to transform this so that this protrudes out slightly. And so if we just quickly go over here on a side note, if we wanted to change the orientation of this, you can click this viewer active here, and then your left mouse button would be rotate, and middle button, if you click that, and you can zoom in and out, and the right mouse button you can pan. Let's just bring this back to how it was, because it's conveniently right at the front, so I don't really want to mess with this too much because it can be fiddly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply copy and paste this, because this one is linked to our render. So with this, we can have a look around. So if we come over to our transform of the sphere iris, let's move this out a little bit and scale this uniformly down. Yeah. And we can see that's looking slightly more like an iris. Have a look at what our render. Yeah. Okay, ignore that. So we have some movement in the eye whites, but what we're going to find is if we have a look at the geometry and see where the axis actually is. So if we click on here, onto a viewer active on the geo iris, and if we click display all options, so that was a right click, display options, we can start to see where the axis is. So if you go over to sphere, and on his anchor, we can change where the anchor point is. So what we want to do is put this to anchor point of the W, just put it to 1. And now the anchor point will still be here, but our sphere is out there. you can see that that's where our anchor point is, but our sphere is there. So it will form as a good anchor point to create a more realistic rotation on the gyro. So, but this is too far forward. So let's now have a look at this translate, which is the position on the z-axis there, and bring this down. Oops, sorry, my bad. We want to bring everything down uniformly, so click on scale and then go to 0.1 by holding down on your middle button, and we can play around with that now. So that's a little bit more realistic. So let's start putting some texture on the iris. We've just got it moving on the x-axis now, but we want to play around with the y-axis later. But for now, let's do a copy on this PNG Y. Let's rename this PNG iris. We want to bring in a transform top, and then use a null. Okay, and then we also want to repeat the process with the Fong. Bring that in, and rename this to null iris. On the diffuse map, bring that in here. Yeah, but obviously we want to change this PNG to the iris image. Okay, and then we want to go over to our iris by going back on the default setting on the geometry. Oh, let's zoom out. And then heading over to render on this iris, and then bring in this material in here. There we go, Fong. Should be called Fong iris. Just doing this for my sake, really. Just as good practice to make sure, because if a model gets too big and if you've named everything default names, it can become very confusing. So I had to, if anyone knows an easier way to texture map this UV map onto this sphere, please let me know, because this was a little bit fiddly. So I'm just going to go ahead, and you can copy what I've done as, something I had to sort of, through trial and error, tweak. So the scale X 0.4, scale Y 0.774, pivot 1.1 to 1.1. Okay. And you can see that the axis is not quite all right. So if we go over to the iris, we can play around with the actual translate Z coordinates 0.015 here like this. Translate one. All this is set to 1 with the scale. Yep, radius. And then if we scale this down to a 0. There we go. A 0.58. That's looking a little bit more realistic now. So if we go over to the transform, hit tile on the whites, put repeat on, go back to transform, and then play around with how the translate, moving around this texture and then scaling it back uniformly. Let's see what that does. Basically what I'm trying to do is to try and get this vein here coming from there, so that that looks about right of what an eyeball should look like. So it does help having this second camera here, so we can dial in things. The eye is probably protruding out a little bit too much, I think. So if we go over to the transform, maybe 0.11, 0.01. There we go. Yeah, that's fine for the purposes of this. And we basically have this now, and if now all we need to do is map our y-axis on here. So we've got our x-axis set up here, that's moving there. Now let's do the same for the y. See what that's doing. Yep, so the x area on here is actually for the y-axis, so we can just mentally note that that should go here for the y-axis. So let's have a look at our math node, and we can get a little bit more erratic, setting the 2 range to maybe something like 2, so it's a little bit more paranoid, I would say, looking up and down. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So we've got our basic setup here, and we can have a little play around with the lighting and come over here and change the color of that if you want something a little bit more yellow, and have a little play around with this. I haven't gone into this too deeply yet to brighten things up, but you can also come down here in this view active and zoom in a little bit more, to try and get whatever sort of desired effect you want. And seeing as there's a bit of a shadow around the edge anyway, I think we'll put a black background here. So if we insert a over to put our eye over a black background using a constant, and set our constant to our desired resolution, go back over here, color, put a black background. There we go. Now we've got that in the dark, looking kind of creepy. And all I did for our start was use the transform and then simply use repeat, scale out for multiple eyes. Creepy stuff indeed. But yeah, if you like this video, please hit the subscribe button. It really helps grow this channel. As soon as I learn a new trick, I'm going to create tutorials for them. So I want to learn as I go, to eventually hit my goal of creating an immersive experience, and having my own exhibition, which would be nice. So so follow me on the journey to that, and maybe one day I'll see you at the exhibition. A guy can dream. So I hope you like this episode, and I'll catch you in the next one.